Good to have you here. This batch is built around something a little quieter than the usual obvious threat. People using trust, access, and normal social rules to get closer than they probably should. And in a few of these, nobody realizes how serious the situation is until one small detail suddenly changes the whole picture. These are very grounded stories. No monsters, no impossible explanations, just family, work, strangers, and those uncomfortable moments where being polite or assuming somebody has permission can put you in a position you never expected. If this is the kind of horror you enjoy, you can support the channel with a subscription. And let me know your thoughts as we go. For now, get settled in. And we'll start with a story where everything looks completely normal until one message proves it isn't. I don't really know what to call this, without making it sound more dramatic than it was, but a while back, when I was 18, I had to message a family I'd known for years and tell them their missing 9-year-old daughter was at my house. She had been there since the night before. And just so this is clear, I wasn't there when Emily got picked up. I didn't bring her home. My mom did. The reason I didn't freak out when I saw Emily at our place is because seeing her there was normal. Our families had known each other for years, and my mom used to help with Emily and her older sister pretty often. She'd pick them up after activities if their parents were busy, or keep them at our place for a few hours. They'd stayed the night before too. Emily knew our house, she knew my mom. She wasn't some kid who barely knew us. I also knew her older sister pretty well. We weren't super close, but we had each other's numbers and talked sometimes. There had been a serious argument between my mom and Emily's parents not long before this happened. I never knew the whole story, and honestly, I still don't. I just knew they basically weren't speaking anymore. My mom thought they were handling some family problems badly and was pretty angry about it. At 18, that was adult drama to me. I stayed out of it. So one evening, I came home and Emily was sitting in our living room watching TV. She looked up and said hi like she always did, then went back to whatever she was watching. Nothing about it felt urgent. I went into the kitchen and asked my mom why Emily was there. She said things had gotten bad at Emily's house again. Emily had been upset after her activity and she'd brought her back so she could stay the night. I thought that was a little strange because of the fight between the adults. Not scary, just strange. I asked, her parents are okay with that? My mom basically said yes, it was fine. She didn't act like I'd caught her doing something. If anything, she seemed annoyed that I was questioning it. The way she talked about it, the sleepover was already settled, and Emily's parents might just be mad that she'd gotten involved again. Later, I talked to Emily for maybe a minute. I don't remember the exact conversation because there was no reason for me to remember it at the time. I think I asked if she was staying over and she answered like, yeah, obviously that was the plan. She wasn't asking to call home or acting like she wanted to leave. She was just a 9-year-old, hanging out at a house she'd been to a bunch of times. I know the obvious question is why I didn't text her parents myself. I didn't because that would have felt weird to me then. My mom had picked those girls up plenty of times over the years, and I'd never been the person checking behind her to make sure every pickup or sleepover had been approved. I was her 18-year-old son. I assumed the adults had handled it. If anything, I thought my mom was getting too involved in somebody else's family problems again. That was as far as my concern went that night. The next morning, Emily's older sister messaged me and asked if I had seen her. At first, I thought she meant recently, like she was trying to figure out when I'd last seen Emily. Then she told me Emily had never come home after her activity the day before. Their parents had been looking for her all night and had already reported her missing. I read the message twice because it didn't fit with what I'd been told. For maybe a minute, I still tried to make it make sense, in the least awful way possible. Maybe my mom had talked to one parent and the other didn't know. Maybe a message hadn't gotten passed along. That sounds stupid now, but when it's your own mother, your brain doesn't jump straight to, she knowingly took somebody else's kid. But I didn't sit there making excuses for her all morning either. I went straight to my mom and asked if she had actually talked to Emily's parents before bringing her home. She started explaining the situation again. Emily had been upset. Things at home had been bad, and she didn't think sending her straight back there was a good idea. She said she was giving Emily somewhere calm to sleep and planned to deal with the parents that morning. So I stopped her and asked, did they know she was here? That was when she finally said no. She hadn't called them. They hadn't told her she could take Emily. My mom had seen Emily upset, decided on her own that she shouldn't go home that night, and brought her back to our house. And Emily thought her parents knew. That part messed with me. The night before, I had taken Emily being calm as proof that everything was normal. But of course, she was calm. She trusted my mom. She thought the adults had worked it out. I still had no idea what my mom thought was going to happen after that, and I wasn't going to pretend I understood what was going through her head. I just knew this wasn't some communication screw-up anymore. She had made the decision herself without Emily's parents knowing. Then my mom asked me to give her a little time. She said she would call Emily's parents herself and explain everything, but she didn't want me telling them where Emily was yet. That was the part where I got genuinely angry. She kept saying Emily had been upset and that one night at our house wasn't some horrible thing because Emily was safe with her. If the parents heard it from somebody else first, she said they'd make it sound worse than it was. And I remember just thinking, they have been looking for their kid all night. They had no idea where their 9-year-old was. Now my mom was asking me to keep that from them a little longer, so she could be the one to explain herself first. Emily was still pretty much outside all of this. She wasn't trying to run away or asking me for help. She still acted like a kid staying with an adult she'd known forever. I don't know exactly what she understood, and I'm not going to put thoughts in her head now, just because I know more than she did then. My mom kept saying, just let me talk to them first. I told her I wasn't arguing about whether Emily had been safe in our house. That wasn't even the point anymore. Her parents were looking for her. They didn't know she was there, and my mom knew that. So I went back to my phone and replied to Emily's sister. I told her Emily was at our house and that my mom had admitted her parents never gave permission for her to take Emily home. After that, things moved pretty fast. Emily's family already had the police involved, so once they knew where she was, her parents came over with officers not long after. I stayed out of the way. There wasn't some big rescue scene. Emily just left with her family. I don't remember her having some huge realization when they showed up either. Maybe she did later. I have no idea. What I remember is that for almost the entire time she was at our house, she seemed calm. My mom was furious with me afterward, mostly because I hadn't given her the chance to call them first. She kept saying Emily had been safe and that she never wanted to hurt her. She also thought Emily's parents were going to make the whole thing sound worse because they were already angry with her. I told her none of that changed what she had actually done. She had taken a 9-year-old without permission. Her parents had spent the night looking for her. Then, once I knew, she asked me to keep quiet a little longer. That was basically where the argument kept ending up, so I stopped trying to get some bigger explanation out of her. I don't know if she honestly thought everyone would calm down once she explained herself, or if she just couldn't admit how bad the decision was. I still don't know, and guessing about it hasn't helped. Emily was back with her family. That part was over. A few days later, I packed some clothes and went to stay with my dad. I couldn't keep living in the same house with my mom and act like what happened had just been some argument between adults that got out of hand. There's something especially upsetting about the fact that Emily was calm the entire time. From the narrator's perspective, that calmness helped make everything seem legitimate. But she was 9 years old. She trusted the adult who picked her up, and she believed her parents knew where she was. I think that's where the story changes completely. The mother keeps coming back to the fact that Emily was safe, as if physical safety somehow cancels out the fact that her parents were searching for their missing child all night. Then she asks her son to delay telling them so she can explain herself first. At that point, whatever good intentions she believed she had stopped mattering nearly as much as the decision she'd already made. I own one small rental cabin, about 40 minutes from where I live. It's off a county road, in a wooded area, where the houses are pretty spread out, and I handle basically everything with the place myself. I don't have employees or a maintenance company on standby. If something breaks, I either go deal with it or call somebody I already know. This happened in the winter. A woman had booked the cabin for 2 nights and brought her dog with her. She hadn't really contacted me after checking in, which is normally what you want. If I don't hear from a guest, I assume everything's fine and leave them alone. Late that evening, she messaged me and asked if I had sent somebody out to check the propane. At first, I thought she meant the tanks outside because the cabin does use propane for heat. Then she explained that there was a man standing on the porch. He was telling her he needed to inspect the tanks and then come inside to look at the heater. I remember reading that and thinking, no, absolutely not. The tanks are right there outside the cabin, so I understood why the story sounded believable to her. If you're staying somewhere you don't know well, and a guy shows up talking about the actual heating system, you're probably going to check with the owner before assuming he's lying. But I knew who I used for that kind of work, and nobody was supposed to be there that night. I messaged her back right away and told her I had not sent anyone and not to open the door. Then I called her. She answered quietly and asked me again if I was sure. I got why she asked. I think she was hoping I had forgotten about something, and this was just an awkward misunderstanding. I told her no, I was sure. There wasn't some other contractor I might have scheduled and forgotten. I asked if she had opened the door at all, and she said she hadn't. I told her to keep it locked and call 911. She stopped answering the man through the door after that. For a little while, there wasn't much happening on my end. I could hear her breathing and the dog moving around. Then she said he had started knocking again. He was still talking about the propane and the heater. She didn't answer him. Then she said, he just tried the handle. That 40-minute drive suddenly mattered a lot more than it ever had before. I could have gotten in my car right then, and it still would have taken me close to 40 minutes to reach her. Normally, that drive is nothing to me. It's just the drive to the cabin. Sitting on the phone while somebody I had not sent was trying the door made it feel completely different. She put me on hold long enough to call 911, then came back while she was also dealing with dispatch. We went back and forth like that for a while. I wasn't trying to keep her talking every second. I mostly wanted her to know I was still there if something changed. I asked if the door was locked. She said yes. A little later, she told me she could hear him walking along the outside wall of the cabin. I didn't tell her to go look for him. I didn't know exactly where he was standing, and I wasn't going to have her moving around just to get me a better description. By then, I knew enough. He had lied about being sent there, tried the door, and stayed outside after she stopped responding. There's a neighbor who lives much closer to the cabin than I do. He'd helped me with small things on the property before when I couldn't get out there quickly. Nothing official. He's just somebody nearby that I know and trust. And more importantly, he could get there a lot sooner than I could. So I called him. I told him there was a guest inside and a man outside, claiming I had sent him for maintenance. I hadn't. The guest had already called 911, and the guy had tried the door and was still hanging around the cabin. I made sure not to act like I knew who he was because I didn't. My neighbor didn't ask a bunch of questions. He said he was getting in his vehicle and heading over. I got back on with the guest and told her he was on the way. She was still talking with emergency dispatch too. At that point, there honestly wasn't much useful information I could give her. We knew the guy wasn't supposed to be there, and the only thing keeping him outside was the fact that she hadn't opened the door. Every so often, she would go quiet and then tell me he was back near the door or moving along the side of the cabin again. He never got inside. That waiting was probably the worst part for me. I had already done the obvious things, but I was still sitting 40 minutes away while she was actually there with him outside. I couldn't see what he was doing or tell her what he wanted. I had no idea. All I could really do was stay available and wait for somebody closer to get there. It's a very useless feeling knowing for sure that something is wrong and still not being able to physically do anything about it. I don't know exactly how long that went on. It probably wasn't nearly as long as it felt, and I don't want to pretend I remember the timing perfectly. Then she cut in and said she could see headlights coming up the driveway. I knew it should be my neighbor, but I still told her not to open the door yet. Almost at the same time, she said the man had stopped knocking. A few seconds later, she told me he was moving away from the porch. She couldn't see everything from where she was, and I wasn't asking her to start checking windows. She said he went toward a pickup parked near the cabin. Then she heard a door shut and the engine start. My neighbor called me right after that. He said he had turned onto the property and saw a pickup pulling out. He didn't block it or try to stop the guy, which I was glad about. He let the truck pass, kept going toward the cabin, and once it was gone, told me the man had left. Only then did I tell the guest that my neighbor was there and she could deal with him directly. She opened the door after she knew who was actually outside. By then, she had been sitting in there with her dog, listening to some stranger move around the cabin, and she was done with the place for the night. I don't blame her. She grabbed what she needed, took the dog, and went back with my neighbor to his house. His family let her stay there. Once I knew she was with them and not alone in the cabin anymore, there really wasn't anything else useful I could do that night. She left the area the next morning instead of staying for the second night. I never found out who the man was. I never found out why he picked that cabin either, or what he planned to do if she opened the door. I try not to turn that into something more specific in my head because I simply don't know. People can come up with theories, but I don't have anything that proves one over another. What I do know is pretty basic. The propane tanks were outside where someone on the property could see them, so the excuse fit the place. He tried the door after she stopped answering him, stayed around the cabin, and left when another adult showed up. That still irritates me, honestly. The excuse wasn't clever. It was just believable enough that a guest had to stop and wonder if the guy might actually be there for a legitimate reason. And I hate that I hadn't thought about that before this happened. Ever since then, I tell guests ahead of time that if I ever need to send somebody to the cabin, they'll hear it directly from me first. No maintenance worker or utility person should be showing up there unannounced. I could really picture this one: a rental cabin, winter outside, a dog inside, and some guy standing on the porch using an excuse that fits the property just well enough to make you hesitate. That hesitation is what bothers me. He didn't need an elaborate story. He saw propane tanks and claimed he was there for the propane. For a guest who doesn't know the property, that is believable enough to ask the owner before assuming the worst. And once she stopped answering, he tried the handle and kept circling the cabin. We never learn what he wanted, and I think leaving that unanswered is probably better than pretending we know. Thankfully, she checked before opening that door. I work in employee housing for one of the concession companies inside a large national park. I'm being vague about which one, for obvious reasons, but if you've ever worked a seasonal park job, you probably know the setup. Staff housing is scattered around, people work weird hours, and after the housing office closes, somebody gets stuck with the duty phone. A few nights a month, that somebody was me. Most calls were boring. Somebody locked themselves out, or a toilet wouldn't stop running, or two roommates had finally decided they couldn't stand each other anymore. I could also pull up our work order system and check whether maintenance had actually been sent somewhere. I should explain the keys because that matters here. Our maintenance guys carried master keys for the staff housing they covered. Not one magic key for the entire park or anything, but enough access to do the job, without waiting around for an employee to get off shift and let them into a room. Anyway, there was a housekeeping employee named Cassie and a night maintenance guy named Dale. I knew there had been some kind of workplace complaint between them. I wasn't involved in the original thing, so I don't know every detail, but Cassie had reported him for something at work, and afterward, Dale kept trying to get her to change what she'd said and stop making problems for him. Management did respond. I want to be fair about that. They separated their shifts as much as possible, told them not to have contact unless work required it, and moved Cassie to another staff dorm. So, in my head, it was handled. Dale was still on night maintenance though, and he still had his regular keys. We were short on maintenance people that season, especially at night. I knew both of those things. I just didn't connect them, because Cassie had been moved and Dale had been told to leave her alone. Then, one night, a little after 10, Cassie called the duty phone. She was talking really quietly and asked, "Did maintenance get sent to my room?" I told her I didn't know yet, and asked, why. She said Dale was outside her new room, telling her there was an emergency maintenance issue he needed to check. She hadn't called anything in. She wasn't even in her room when he showed up. A few minutes earlier, she'd gone to the small shared bathroom down the hall, and when she heard Dale outside her door, she stayed there. The bathroom locked from the inside, so I told her not to come out while I checked. While she was explaining it, I could hear knocking through the phone. Not super loud, but close enough that I knew it was near her. Then, the knocking stopped. Cassie went quiet for a second and said, "He's opening my door." That was the point where this stopped feeling like some awkward employee issue. Maintenance could enter rooms when there was an actual reason. That part was normal. Dale standing outside the room of an employee he wasn't supposed to be contacting, claiming an emergency call she never made, was not. I pulled up the work orders while keeping Cassie on the phone. Nothing for her room. I checked the emergency calls too because I thought maybe somebody had phoned maintenance directly and it hadn't hit the main queue yet. I know that sounds like I was looking for an excuse. Maybe I was for about 30 seconds. I just wanted to be sure before I called law enforcement on a coworker. There was nothing that would have sent Dale to that room. At that point, I stopped trying to make it make sense. I told Cassie, "Stay in the bathroom. Don't answer him. Keep your phone with you." She asked if I was sure there wasn't some call she didn't know about. I told her there was nothing in the system and that I was calling Ranger Dispatch. I used the housing office desk phone for dispatch so I could keep Cassie on the duty phone. I gave them the dorm and Dale's name, then explained the part that mattered. Cassie had already been moved because of an employee issue with him. There was no work order for her room, and Dale had used a maintenance key to get inside anyway. While I was on with dispatch, Cassie whispered that she could hear him inside her room. I couldn't hear much through her phone, just faint movement, so I had her tell me only what she was sure about. A little later, she said he had come back into the hall and was calling her name. He wasn't screaming or threatening her. Cassie said he kept saying he only wanted to talk, and that she needed to stop making his job into a problem. I passed that along to dispatch and told her again not to answer him. The thing I kept thinking about was that he didn't know where she was. He knew her room and had gotten into it, but he hadn't seen her go into the bathroom. And Cassie hadn't said anything to him. I didn't want her giving away where she was by yelling through the door or stepping into the hall because she felt stupid hiding in there. And she did feel stupid. I remember that because I kept telling her she was fine and to stay put. People think that when something like this happens, everyone instantly understands that it's an emergency. A lot of the time, they're apologizing for bothering you. I kept her on the duty phone and kept updating dispatch that Dale was still in the building. Eventually, dispatch told me the Rangers were at the dorm. About a minute later, Cassie said she could hear other voices in the hallway. I couldn't make out what they were saying, and I wasn't going to tell her to unlock the bathroom just to check. Dispatch confirmed they had Dale near her room and told me to keep Cassie where she was until he was outside. From what I was told later, they stopped him there and walked him out of the building. Cassie stayed in the bathroom until dispatch told me he was out. Then I told her she could unlock the door. She stayed on the phone with me while she stepped into the hall and met one of the Rangers. I never went over there. I never confronted Dale. I never even saw him that night. A couple coworkers later talked about it like I had saved her or something, which made me uncomfortable. I didn't. I checked the system, made the call, and kept her on the phone. The Rangers were the ones who removed him. Dale lost his job after that and had to turn in his employee keys. I wasn't involved in whatever meetings happened above me, so I don't know all the HR details. I just know he disappeared from the maintenance schedule, and his keys came back. The reason he still had them in the first place came up later, through normal housing and operations talk. Basically, management had tried to separate Dale and Cassie, without taking Dale completely off night maintenance. We were badly understaffed, which everybody knew, and they still needed somebody covering those hours. A night maintenance employee without access to staff housing wasn't much use on a lot of calls. So they moved Cassie and separated their work as much as they could. But Dale stayed in a job that still let him open her new room. I don't think there was some conspiracy behind it. Nobody ever told me management expected him to go there, and I never heard anything suggesting they knew he would make up a maintenance call. It was more stupid than evil, if that makes sense. They changed the obvious things and left one thing alone because his job depended on it. I also don't know what Dale would have done if Cassie had walked back into the hallway when he first showed up. Maybe he really did only want to argue with her. Maybe it would have gone worse. I honestly don't know, and I'm glad I don't. The part that still gets under my skin is how normal all of it looked on paper before that call. She had been moved. Their shifts were separated. As far as we were concerned, that was the fix. Now, whenever somebody tells me two employees have been separated, I don't really care what the memo says first. I ask, who still has the keys? Honestly, the sentence at the end says almost everything. Who still has the keys? Management had technically done something. They moved Cassie. They separated the shifts. On paper, there was a solution, but Dale was still working a job that gave him access to her new room, and that one practical detail made the rest of the separation almost meaningless. I also liked that the narrator didn't turn himself into some hero afterward. He checked the records, confirmed there was no legitimate maintenance call, and got the Rangers involved. That's it. Sometimes the right response is not dramatic at all. It is just believing that something is wrong once the normal explanation stops holding up. And in Cassie's case, that mattered. I was 17 when this happened. I had a summer job at a holiday park on the Welsh coast, one of those places with reception near the entrance and caravans and holiday units spread around the site. Most evenings, I got these small jobs that weren't worth calling maintenance for. Usually, it was bringing towels over, or sorting out a remote that had stopped working. We were short on staff in summer, so if the problem was simple and you were free, you went. It was also pretty normal for reception to send the same person back to a caravan if they'd already dealt with that guest. You knew where you were going. The guest didn't have to explain everything again, and nobody really thought anything of it. The man I'm talking about was probably in his 50s. I'm fairly sure his first call was because his TV remote wasn't working. I changed the batteries, checked it, gave it back to him, and the actual job was done. He kept talking though. He asked how long I'd worked there, whether I was local, if I liked the job. Nothing wild. Holiday makers made conversation with staff all the time, and at 17, I still felt like if an older person kept talking to me, I was supposed to stand there and be polite. I gave him vague answers, said I was only there for the summer, then told him I had other jobs to get on with, and went back to reception. A day or two later, he called again about another small problem. This time, he apparently told reception that the lad who'd come before already knew the caravan and could probably sort it quicker, so they sent me. I didn't find that weird at the time. Neither did anyone at reception. Guests sometimes asked for the same member of staff if that person had already helped them. He remembered my name on the second visit, which did catch me slightly off guard. The job itself only took a couple of minutes. Once it was finished, he started asking what shifts I worked and what I did when I wasn't at the park. I answered some of it and dodged the rest. Mostly, I started doing that thing where you act busier than you actually are, because you don't know how to end the conversation without sounding rude. Over the next few days, his calls got more specific. Instead of asking if someone could come over, he'd ask whether I was working and if reception could send me, because I already knew was what in his caravan. The difficult part was that the jobs weren't all nonsense. One time, he genuinely needed towels, and on another occasion, something small did need looking at. So I couldn't tell reception he was inventing problems to get me over there. I didn't know that. And even now, I wouldn't say they were all fake. It was what happened once the job was finished that started bothering me. He'd keep talking. He asked about school, what I was doing after summer, and roughly how far away I lived. Looking back, I can see why that sounds bad. At the time, I mostly thought he was a weird older bloke who was getting too interested in me. I started keeping my answers short and leaving as soon as I could. A couple of times, I said reception had something else waiting for me, when really I just wanted an excuse to go. I remember being irritated before I was properly worried. He hadn't threatened me or stopped me from leaving. He was just this much older guest who kept asking for me specifically, and then trying to find out things that had nothing to do with whatever I'd been sent there to fix. During one visit, he asked if I wanted some cash work outside the park. He said he might need help moving a few things, and I could give him a hand after a shift or later in the summer. Then he wrote his number on a scrap of paper and gave it to me. I took the paper. I know that probably sounds passive, but refusing it right there felt more awkward than just taking it and leaving. I never called him, and I never gave him my number. By that point, I couldn't really tell myself he was only being chatty anymore. Offering someone a bit of cash work isn't automatically sinister. It was more that he'd already been asking reception for me, and now he was trying to make contact outside the park as well. On my next shift, somebody at reception told me his caravan had called again, and he'd specifically asked for me. I hesitated and then said I'd rather not go. The woman behind the desk asked if something had happened. I gave her a pretty clumsy explanation, because I still wasn't sure how to phrase it. I said he always kept me there talking after the job was done, asked personal stuff, and had given me his number for some work outside the park. She didn't turn it into a big thing. She didn't ask me to prove he was dangerous or make a formal complaint. She just said, okay, and told me she'd send somebody else if his caravan called again. That helped immediately. I carried on with the same shift and the same little jobs around the park. I just wasn't being sent to him anymore. The next time he called, one of the older staff went instead. When he came back, he said the problem had been minor and took hardly any time to sort out. He also mentioned that the guest had asked straight away why the young lad hadn't come. Later, there was another call from the same caravan. Reception told him somebody else would come over, and he said not to bother because the problem had sorted itself out. I didn't take that as proof every earlier call had been made up. Some of them clearly hadn't. But reception had now seen the same thing I had. Whether he still needed help sometimes seemed to depend on whether I was the person coming, so they stopped assigning me to that caravan. The next time he rang, he apparently asked for me again and was told whoever was free would come over. Another member of staff went and dealt with whatever he needed. Later in that shift, the man came into reception himself. I was in the back dealing with a pile of linen when I recognized his voice at the desk. I could hear him clearly from where I was, but I stayed where I was. He wasn't shouting or threatening anyone. He sounded annoyed, basically like a customer who thought he was getting bad service. He wanted to know why different people kept being sent to his caravan when I'd been helping him before. The woman on reception told him staff were sent depending on who was available. He kept coming back to the fact that I already knew the caravan and had helped him before, so he didn't see why they couldn't just send me. That was the part I found hardest to brush off. His requests were still being dealt with. He seemed bothered by the fact that I wasn't the one turning up. I didn't go out there, and nobody asked me to. Honestly, I was relieved. I'd already had trouble explaining why the whole thing bothered me, without making it sound like I was accusing him of something I couldn't prove. I wasn't going to be any better at explaining it to him face to face. The manager got involved after that. As far as I remember, there wasn't some big meeting or formal process. He just made the rule simple. If the man had a problem with his caravan, he could call reception and someone would help him. He didn't get to choose which member of staff was sent, and I wasn't going back to his unit. He argued a bit. I was told he said there hadn't been any problem before, and that I already knew my way around his caravan. The manager didn't argue about why he wanted me. If something genuinely needed sorting, another member of staff could sort it. That was basically the end of my involvement with him. He still had a few days left on his booking, so he stayed at the park. Other staff went over if he needed anything, and I carried on doing my normal evening jobs. There wasn't some final confrontation between the two of us, and he didn't pull me into another conversation. When his booking ended, he checked out and left like any other holidaymaker. He didn't leave me a message, and he never contacted me afterwards. I never used the number he gave me, so I have no idea what that cash job would actually have been. Even now, I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what he wanted from me, because I don't. I don't know what would have happened if I'd agreed to meet him outside work, either. The part that still bothers me is simpler than that. Once reception stopped sending me, some of the problems that had seemed urgent enough to call about suddenly weren't urgent anymore. This is one of those stories where nothing definitive ever happens, and somehow that makes it more uncomfortable. The man never openly threatens him. He never physically prevents him from leaving. Every individual interaction can almost be explained away as an overly friendly guest talking too much. But then you look at the pattern. Asking for the same 17-year-old employee repeatedly, asking personal questions, offering him work outside the park, giving him a phone number, and suddenly losing interest in certain problems when somebody else is sent. I'm glad the reception staff didn't demand some dramatic piece of proof before taking him seriously. They simply stopped sending him there. Whatever that guest actually wanted, there was no good reason a teenager had to keep finding out. I don't know if this is really a scary story in the normal sense, because nothing happened to me. That's kind of why I've had trouble explaining why it still bothers me. I was 27 when this happened and working evenings at the front desk of a small office building in the suburbs. It wasn't a security job. I mostly sat in the lobby, dealt with visitors, and handled the basic closing stuff before I went home. The actual companies in the building had their own offices behind badge-controlled doors. The first floor lobby was shared space with a few chairs off to the side of my desk. The front doors switched over at a certain time every night. Once that happened, somebody outside needed access to get in, but anybody already inside could still walk out normally. People worked late sometimes too. I knew which companies rented space there, but I definitely didn't know every employee or when they planned to leave. My end-of-night routine wasn't complicated. I usually put away whatever was sitting around the desk, made sure the common area wasn't a mess, and left. I wasn't going floor to floor looking for people. Each company handled its own office, so seeing lights upstairs when I went home wasn't unusual at all. One evening, a little before the door switched over, a guy came in and stopped at my desk. He didn't have a badge. He looked tired and kind of worn down, but that's honestly all I remember thinking about him. His shirt was wrinkled. He wasn't angry, wasn't raising his voice, wasn't doing anything that made me think I needed to get somebody else involved. He told me he'd worked for one of the companies upstairs until recently and had been fired. He said he still had some personal stuff in the office, and somebody from the company was supposed to bring it down to him. That was basically the whole explanation. I know recently fired employee sounds like a giant warning sign when you already know where this is going. At the time, it didn't hit me that way. If he'd been fired, then of course his old badge probably wouldn't work anymore. And it wasn't unusual for somebody from one of the offices to still be upstairs after normal business hours. He knew the company name, and I knew it was one of our tenants. Nothing about what he was saying sounded impossible. Then he asked if he could sit in the lobby for a while and wait. I hesitated, but not because I was scared of him. It was more that stupid work moment where somebody asks for a small favor, and you have to decide whether saying no is going to turn into a whole conversation. I could have told him to wait in the parking lot. I just didn't see much reason to. He wasn't asking me to get him upstairs or find the person for him. He just wanted a chair. So I said sure. He thanked me, went over to the seating area, and sat down. I went back to finishing my shift. I had some stuff behind the desk to put away and a little paperwork to straighten out. Every so often, I'd look up and see he was still there. He mostly kept to himself. There wasn't some sequence of weird things that I ignored. He didn't try to get through the badge doors or keep coming back to ask me questions. He was just sitting there, waiting. That's actually one of the things that messes with me now. When you know what happened later, you want there to have been something obvious. Some look, some comment, whatever. I keep going back over it, and there really wasn't. By the time I was getting ready to leave, the front doors were already in after-hours mode. There were still lights on in parts of the building, which was normal enough that I didn't think anything of it. I had no idea who exactly was still upstairs. The guy was still in the lobby. I remember looking over while I was getting my things together and almost asking how much longer he planned to wait. Then I thought, what am I going to do with that answer? I didn't know when the person he was waiting for was leaving. If the guy got tired of sitting there, he could walk out through the front doors on his own. So I finished up, grabbed my stuff, and left with him still sitting there. The next afternoon, not long after I came in, the building manager came over and asked if I'd been working the night before. I thought he was about to ask me about some dumb building problem. Maybe a door hadn't shut right, or somebody had left something in the lobby. I said yeah. Then he told me a supervisor from one of the companies upstairs had been badly beaten outside the building after work. I knew the supervisor's name, but only in that vague workplace way where you've seen a name in emails or heard somebody mention it. I didn't know him personally. The building manager said the person who attacked him was a former employee who'd recently been fired. Even then, I didn't immediately connect it. Then he described the former employee and said he'd been in the building the night before, waiting for the supervisor to come down. I knew exactly who he meant. I told him about the guy at my desk and the story he'd given me about his belongings. I also told him I'd let him wait in the lobby. The building manager asked if I'd let him upstairs or given him access to the offices. No, I hadn't. Later, I answered a few more questions about when he'd arrived and what he'd said. They also wanted to know whether I'd told him anything about the supervisor's schedule. I hadn't because I didn't know it. The guy hadn't asked me for that kind of information anyway. The building manager later told me there'd been a brief exchange after the supervisor came out of the building, and then the former employee attacked him. That's about as much as I know about the assault itself. I wasn't there. I never saw either of them leave, and I don't know exactly where outside they met or what was said between them. I also don't know what the guy had planned before he walked into the lobby. Maybe he really did have stuff left in the office. Maybe that part wasn't even a lie. I have no idea. But obviously the whole interaction felt different after that. What I'd thought was a guy waiting for somebody to bring down a box or whatever was, at minimum, a guy sitting comfortably inside while he waited for his former boss to come out. That's the part I can't get completely past. I didn't take him upstairs, give him a badge, or tell him when the supervisor was leaving. I couldn't have told him most of that, even if he'd asked. He already knew the building because he'd worked there, and he showed up on his own. So part of me keeps going, okay, if I'd said no, then what? He could have waited in the parking lot. He could have stood near the building. Nothing I did created the reason he was there, and I don't know that making him sit outside would have changed anything. That's the explanation that makes the most sense to me. The problem is, he asked if he could wait inside, and I said yes. Nobody blamed me for the attack. The building manager didn't, and the few questions I had to answer afterward were basically because I'd spoken to the guy shortly before it happened. That was the end of my involvement. I never saw him again. I think that's why I'm writing this now. It wasn't some huge choice where I weighed the risks and made the wrong call. It barely felt like a choice at all. A tired guy asked if he could sit down for a while instead of waiting outside, and I figured there was no reason to make it into a problem. I still don't know if saying no would have changed a single thing, but I know I made the waiting easier for him. I understand why the narrator keeps arguing with himself about this one. He didn't tell the man where his former supervisor was. He didn't let him into a secured office. He didn't help plan an attack. He allowed somebody who seemed tired and harmless to sit in a lobby. That is such a tiny decision that it barely registers as one. And then afterward, suddenly every minute the man spent sitting there feels different. Maybe forcing him outside would have changed nothing. He could have waited in the parking lot. There is no way to know. But I think the narrator's final thought explains why it stayed with him. He didn't cause what happened, but without realizing it, he made the waiting easier. That is a very difficult kind of guilt to put down. I think the common thread through all 5 of these is how much danger can hide inside something that still looks reasonable. A familiar adult picking up a child, a maintenance worker at a rental, an employee with legitimate keys, a guest asking for the same member of staff, someone simply wanting to wait indoors. None of those things sound frightening by themselves. Context is what changes them. I'm curious where you drew the line in these stories. At what moment would you have stopped assuming everything was normal and started treating the situation differently? Put your thoughts in the comments. And if you've been enjoying these grounded, real-feeling horror stories, consider subscribing and giving the video a like. It helps more people find the channel. Thank you for spending part of your day here and listening through the full batch. I appreciate it. Take care, and goodbye for now.